So, welcome back. Hopefully everybody here is staying healthy, doing well, still having a little bit of fun. We're now getting into the part of the course that is both the most interesting, the most valuable, and also probably the most challenging. So, we're going to take this a little bit slow. You're going to notice that we're going to sort of work over the next 3 lectures. So this entire week's worth of lectures, really going through these points in fine detail. I'm talking specifically right now about AJAX. Hopefully you saw this in the video. For those of you who didn't, AJAX it's actually something, it is an acronym, meaning its letters stand for something, but that acronym is actually an anachronism. I'm not going to try to say that quickly, meaning it's out of time. So AJAX originally stood for Asynchronous JavaScript on XML. It used to be the dominant way of contacting and connecting across the internet was using this technology called XML. Now we tend to use JSON a lot more, but the name stuck. So to understand AJAX, it's important to understand each part of what it means. And I know I went over this in the lecture, but just to make sure, lecture videos, there's no lecture anymore. But just to make sure everybody understands what's going on, right? So the A in AJAX is kind of important, asynchronous. What this means is that we're going to be sending messages back and forth between the front end, the web page, and remember that runs in our browser, and the back end, the server. And remember that runs on the server, on Replic's machine. So what I want to do today is give you a very, very simple version of an AJAX connection. And the reason that we're going to be doing it this way is, so today we're going to do something relatively simple, both on the client side and on the server side, just to make sure that everybody understands how this AJAX process works. On Wednesday, we'll actually take this same rough example and really build it out and show how we can make really interesting, interactive web applications using these technologies. And then on Friday, we're really going to take it to the next level and start to build a web application that hopefully you'd actually want to show somebody as opposed to the ones today and probably Wednesday. But got to start somewhere. So what you're seeing right now on your screen is an HTML file I wrote up. It's a pretty simple, straightforward, hopefully HTML file. So you can see right now, I'm actually going to move this over just to start this up. So, we've got HTML. Remember, every HTML file should have at most one head, at most one body. Typically, it has both one of each, just like anything else out there. So in my head, I have 2 different script statements. So I'm going to load 2 different pieces of JavaScript. The first thing I'm loading in is this link. And if you look, it looks like a library. It is a full URL. In some ways, it is a library, but it's a library where I'm kind of cheating here. So if you look, this is actually a library in the 115 course pages. So one of the things that we talked about in the lecture video is that all of this AJAX is built off of some pretty complicated programming that really has to deal with the history of how the web was developed and all of the different browsers we use and things like that. And one place where this really comes up is in AJAX. And in fact, we're at a moment right now where this is going to get about to get a little bit more complicated. The last JavaScript standard, technically the ECMAScript standard, actually has a new way of dealing with AJAX, another new way of dealing with AJAX. The old way is still allowed, which is what we're going to talk about, but it's just going to make the coding more complex in terms of what your functions have to do. So this library right here, I actually have it loaded up just to show you all. It just has those 2 functions that we talked about in the lecture for calling AJAX. AJAX get request. And remember, we use get request when we want to request data from the server, and AJAX post request when we want to send data to the server and get a response. So 99.999% of the time, the way that we write these functions, you guys can't see it because I'm not on camera. I'm making air quotes right now around the right. Honestly, we just copy and paste these functions. I happen to have copy and pasted this from another professor who actually taught 115 about almost 2 years ago now. The first time we did this new version of 115, I know he copy and pasted it from somebody else. The point being, this code is relatively unimportant. The only thing that we're going to expect you to be able to do is call and use AJAX get request, AJAX post request. To make it simpler, I'm just going to make this library available for all of you to use in your projects. I'm going to be using this for everywhere just to hold those two functions. That way we don't have to think about them or see them. So the other file I have here is a call to script.js, and that is just a JavaScript file that I wrote that's we're going to do a very, very simple sort of response. I call it a chat server. It's not really a chat server. We'll do that on Wednesday. Today, what we're going to do is just a way that we can send messages to the server and have the server respond back. And we can even just get those messages back. So that's the head region. So that loads in our JavaScript. Then in the body region, I have a div here, a region, just a region that we're going to define. I gave it the ID of chat. That's going to be where we're going to post the messages or post the responses. And then I've got this BR. This is a way of saying move to the next line. I've then got just a little bit of text here, message, just to know what we're looking at. And then inside a message, right next to message, I'm going to have an input element. So this will be a text box. That's what that type equals text means. And its ID is message. And this is where we will get, oh, and I forgot to end this. Hold on a second. So just like JavaScript, the browsers tend to be very nice. I forgot the ending tag. So this will create our message area. So this is where we're going to have a text box that we can type information in. And then I have it's actually another type of input, but we tend to use button. So a button that will say send. So we'll use this to when we want to send a button. And note right here, I've got this thing on click. This is a special property for HTML elements. In particular, this is one that's commonly used with button. What it does is it says when this button is clicked, so on a click, and what you can do there is put in any JavaScript code you want, and it'll actually execute that JavaScript. So I said, call this function send message. Now, I have in our replet, this is a Python, a regular Python replet. I have two other files. I have the JavaScript file and the main.py file. We're going to start a little bit with the main.py file. So you can see I'm importing the bottle library because it's a web server. We need that. I'm importing the JSON library because in order for this AJAX code to work, we're going to need to use JSON to transmit data back and forth. And then because it's easier for me later on, so if you look what this is right here, so it's a variable, I named it quote stir. And what it is it is a string that just contains a double quote. And it's really ugly to look at and confusing to look at. And I just don't like it to look at it. So I'm just gonna put it into a constant. That way it's simpler. So then I have a few, sort of things that we've seen before. I have this bottle route for slash, and that's going to serve up the HTML file. So I read it in using bottle.static file, index.html. That's what we're looking for. Remember, we need to have that root equals dot, string dot. That'll read in the HTML file as a string, and then I return it. So that way we can see that page. And I have the same thing for chat.js, so that way we can read in the JavaScript file and return it. And then way here at the bottom, I have two different things that'll get executed. There are two other functions we'll talk about in a little bit. The first thing is, one thing that can get very confusing in this sort of work is the fact that we're going to have two separate computers when we're running AJAX. Remember, we've got the code that runs on the web server. That's going to be everything here in this Python file. And then we have the code that's going to run, in this case, on my browser. Though, to be honest, if you look at the URL at the top of the page, you actually, once I start running this web server, could run it on your own browser also. We can have many people running it. So to try to make clear what's happening when, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using prints and console logs. And so you can actually see on the screen what things happen. So when the program starts, when the server starts, what I want to do is just print out a message that says anything printed was run on Replit. So we know anything that occurs in oh, wow. I've gotten I got a message that's being held for review. Anybody who is trying to use this for help, we have Piazza for that. No, that's not appropriate to be asking for that right now and advertising your Snapchat, which does not look appropriate for a classroom setting. So anyway, we're going to print out anything that prints out in here, we'll know was run on the Replit server. And then what I'm going to do now is, just to start this off, I'm going to run our bottle server. You note that I added one argument to this call. I have this quiet is assigned true. And what this does is this is just going to eliminate the output from the bottle server, just to make it easier for us to read the messages that I'm printing out. So if I run this, you can see we don't see anything. And now over here, I have a page up. I had actually started it before we started. And you can see, why is it saying that that's not working? Loading failed for script. Why? I had that page up just a few seconds ago. Hold on a second. Let me see why this isn't working. So ironically, a few minutes ago, I had this all set up, and let's try restarting this. Why is it not running this thing? So this is the fun thing that you do. At the last second, you're like, okay, I'm going to get this started up, and everything should be good. And you can see that this is a good file. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I will cheat. If it doesn't want to do that, I'll go back to the way it was. I'm going to add a file for AJAX. Apparently, it doesn't want me to do that, so I'll just create a new file here. And then in my main.py, create another function for ajax.js. Give it a name. So one lesson you learn in computer science, never do live demos like I'm doing right now, because things always go wrong. Okay, so now that we won't have that problem, since it's going to be served up by the server, we'll do this again. Reload this. So you can see I am going to be dumping out on my console. I have here, anything here was run on my computer, right? This is being run in my browser on my computer. And so that's going to be in this chat.js file. So you can see I begin by having this console.log. Anything here was run on my computer. And now you can see I have 3 functions defined in this file. So one function is request chat. And what this is going to do is this is going to request a message from the server. So it's going to request that we send over a message. So it's going to call AJAX get request. And when we call AJAX get request, we have to give it 2 arguments. The first argument is that URL, the location on the server that we want to call. So here you can see I'm going to request chat/chat. The second thing that we need to provide is the name of a function that will be executed when we get a response. And now this is where it's going to start to might get a little confusing for some of you. This is where we get that asynchronous aspect of AJAX. What's going to happen is when we call request chat, it's going to make a request and send a request to the server. Now, from the perspective of all of us, we're probably going to get that response back almost instantaneously because computers run really, really fast. From the perspective of a computer, however, this request is going to take an awfully long time. There's going to be a gap, again, if you're a computer, between when that request is sent and when the response comes in. And so part of what AJAX GET request does is it's going to take care, and AJAX in general does, is it takes care of that gap for us. We give it the name of a function, and then whenever we receive that response, it might be instantaneous, but probably all of you have had times where you've been sitting around waiting for a page to load. So you know web pages don't, and web responses don't always come back immediately. When there is that delay, it will wait. And so render chat will only be called, that function will only be called when we get a response, no sooner. So when we get a response from that request, what I have here is this function render chat. Now, again, it's going to get a piece of data. It's going to get as its parameter whatever the server responded with. So we sent a request. It's going to say here, have something back. Now, it's going to send us data back. That data is going to be a JSON blob. And we know it's going to be a JSON blob because we're going to write the server, and that's what we said it will be. It doesn't have to be a JSON blob. You have to define it yourself. For this class, that's what we're always doing. So our first step is going to be to take that JSON blob called json.parse. Remember, that's the JavaScript function built into JavaScript that will take in a JSON blob and return usable JavaScript data. So just to show you how this works, what I'm going to do is I'll log that JSON blob that gets sent back and then what the message is. And then what we're going to do is add that message to our window. So in order for this to work, I'm actually going to make one other change. So one other important function in HTML that we often use in these web apps is onload. Let's see if it brings up. So if you see there's onload here, and what that says is that's a way of telling JavaScript, telling my browser, when this page is loaded, I want you to run a function. Now, if we go back to that chat.js, we have two different functions we could call that we've talked about so far: request chat and render chat. Now, remember, if we just call render chat directly, we'd have to give it JSON data, the JSON data that gets sent to us by the server. That doesn't make sense, right? What we want to do is request a message from the server. So what we're going to do is call request chat. Make sure I spelled that correctly and wrote that correctly. I did. And so now what's going to happen is when the page loads, it will call request chat. It'll request that chat. And at some point later on, once it receives a response, it will call render chat. So just to make sure that we're all clear on how this is going to work, let's go look in my Python file. And you can see I've got this other function that's going to handle /chat. So note that when we send a GET request, the function that handles it has to have that @bottle route. the same thing that we've been working with forever. And for today, my goal for today for all of you is just to understand how this process works. So when we send a request, we don't get any input, right? That's just a way of saying, hey, send me some data back. So we just have to send a response. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to have it print. The response will be for Wednesday. In Wednesday's video and in Wednesday's live Q&A, we'll do a lot more with how we can actually make this a much more interactive application. For today, we're just going to talk about how this AJAX communication works. So we'll have it print out the response. We'll dump it to a JSON blob and have that printed out. So let me restart this. And let me restart this web page. Let me actually clear this off. So just to make clear everything that's going on, we know that that's only going to be the stuff in Replit. If I reload this, what do we see? So we see that here we get received for Wednesday and then for Wednesday, right? This is that JavaScript message. We have received, and then note that when we look at this, right, the quotes are part of the string we receive because in JSON, a string is inside of actual quotes, those quote characters. So it receives quote, a string that contains quote for Wednesday, another quote. Then when we parse that out, we get just the string for Wednesday, what you would expect. Now, the big thing to remember here is this code, this render chat function, is being executed on my computer. And this might be a little confusing, right? In index.html, we just said, just call request chat. We haven't said to call render chat anywhere because we don't have to. The way that we make sure that that's called is in this call to AJAX get request, because we said, whenever you get a response, might be very soon, might take a while, call render chat at that time. That's what's going to happen. Now over here, you can see that we have for Wednesday and then quote for Wednesday. That comes from over here, and actually just to make it more clear, just to make clear where these things are coming from so that everybody can see that. Let's reload this. You can see that this message, the Python code, is being executed on Replit's servers, right? Not on my computer, but on their computer. And so it gets sending for Wednesday. And now when we turn it into a JSON blob, it adds those quotes because that's what we do for a string, specifically for a string. So what does this mean? Well, if we look at the page, note that on our page, it displays for Wednesday. And the reason why is in my JavaScript code, right? We get that input, we receive it, we turn that message into usable data. We then, on line 11 here, get that chat element, that div that we set up to hold all these messages. We get whatever its current contents are. Remember, for any non-input element, the inner HTML gets its current contents. We're going to add this little BR. This is a little bit of HTML that adds just a new line. And then we add to that our message. And we now assign that inner HTML, and this updates its contents. So every time we request a chat, we'll get a message back. So that's kind of interesting, I guess, a little bit, maybe. Probably not, I realize. So what's a lot more interesting is what we want to do is, right, we have on our page this nice text area where I can type things in and a send button. So if you remember in the HTML, the send button says call send message. So that is this last function right here. Now, the first part of this code should look familiar. What we're going to do when the send message function is called, we get that element named message. That is that text box, that input. We then want to get whatever text I've typed in there. So we have message element dot value. Remember, for input elements, we get its contents using value, and that will give me a string. Doesn't matter what I type in there, it will be a string. Assign it to message. Then I'm going to assign message element dot value. So what this is going to do is I'm going to assign that to the empty string. And the reason I'm doing that is it's not necessary. It just makes it more clear what's going on, right? When we type something in and we hit send, we expect the text box to be cleared. That's just how we work. So I then want to send it. And so I'm going to turn that string, whatever I typed in, into a JSON blob. And actually, I will log this. So I'll log that we're sending it out just so you can see it. And then now when I send data, right, a GET request is to request data. To send data to the server, we have to use AJAX post request. And so the way that we do that is we give it a URL. Again, any URL is okay. You just have to define it yourself. I'm using /send. It seemed like a good idea. We then give it the data that we want to send. I called it to send here. That's the name of the variable, right? That's going to have the JSON blob. And the last thing that we're going to do, what does stringify mean? Good. That is an excellent question. Boo Boo the Fool. Interesting name. Is that Squidward dabbing? Okay. Anyway, stringify is the JSON function built into JavaScript that turns JavaScript data into a JSON blob. So when we want to send data to the server, what we have to do is take whatever our data is. Here it's a string. It could be anything. And call json.stringify to turn it into a JSON blob. And then that's the data that we want to send. So excellent question. Hopefully that answers it. If not, ask me more. So we're going to send that JSON, that now JSON blob, right? That not the message, but to send. And then what we have to give, that third argument, is going to be whenever we send data to the server is always going to send back a response. Now, for this problem, right, the response that we need, we're just going to get a message back. We just want to display it the same way we've been displaying all the messages. So I can still use that render chat. Note, I still don't have, and nowhere in my code do I ever call this render chat function. This is going to happen automatically because I'm using this AJAX get request, AJAX post request function. All I have to do is list it as that third argument, and it'll be taken care of. Now, in order for this to work, I need to have something on my server listening to /send. So let's go over to the server code. And here on the server code, note that I have a function. It's got this bottle annotation. It uses /send. But note there is a change here. In this case, rather than saying bottle.route like we did before, we have to say @bottle.post. And that @bottle.post tells the server, tells Bottle, to listen for post requests. Listen for when we're sending data to it. So when we send data to /send, first thing it's going to do, and I'd like to give you some nice, simple, easy to remember sort of process. You just kind of have to memorize this. Sorry. Copy and paste, memorize. There is this call you're going to have to make at the beginning, bottle.request.body.read, and that read is a function. And what this does is this gets the contents of that post request. It's going to get that data. And I'll just print this out. And that's actually not particularly usable because of how text gets handled over the web. So the next thing we have to do is call content.decode, and that will get us our blob. And then what we can do is call json.loads, Remember, that's what we do to turn a JSON blob into usable data. Right, our good content. And then what I have is the way that I know all of you think about any sort of chat. What's a blob? So a bit of JSON data is typically called a JSON blob, just a name. Just a way of saying it's a bunch of JSON data. So I apologize for making fun of, anyway. So here we have, what I'm going to do is I just have a couple of canned responses, right? So what this find does is it does a search. It returns the index that it finds that string at. If it doesn't equal -1, that means it actually found the text. So if it finds Python anywhere in the string, it'll return the message that is server talk. If it sees JavaScript anywhere, it'll say that is browser talk, and anything else, it'll just label boring. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat, and I just wanted to point out that there are lots of different ways that we can handle this. There is nothing special about those JSON functions. Usually we use them because usually we're dealing with complex data and we don't want to turn it into a JSON blob, into the JSON format on our own, but we can, right? A JSON string is simply a bunch of text inside of quotes. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to construct that JSON blob on my own, right? So I'm just going to have a quote and then the message and an end quote. And so now if I restart it so we can see what happens. So now if I type a message, right? So here I have Python are types of snakes. This is a message. Obviously note that it has Python. When I click send, nothing happens right now because I haven't told it to do anything. As soon as I click send, remember that what's going to happen is because we have that on click in our button, it's going to trigger that function. It's supposed to trigger that function. Oh, because I screwed up on the server code. So what it's telling me, I tried. What happened was in our chat.js, it went through here. It was able to get that message. It erased the message, note there, called stringify. Not sure why it didn't log that message. It should have logged that message. I have to reload the page. And then it called send. But here in send, in the server, excuse me, note that I have, if you look at this error message, it says on line 34, this print. That content we get back isn't a string. It isn't a stir. In order for this to work, I would need to turn it into a stir. That's kind of a pain. So what I'm going to do is just restart this. So now if I have, you can see we got this message sending to server, Python is snakes, right? So that JavaScript code sending to server, this function right here ran on my computer, ran in my browser, or yours if you're using it. Note that we also got all these messages here. You know, the server blob, Python is snakes. This content is, that JSON blob we received is exactly what we sent. But now this code is being run on Replic's computers, completely different computer. We then undo that string, we undo that JSON blob, and on Wednesday we'll do more interesting things. And what are we going to send back? We're going to send back, that is server talk, right? That's what we send out. Now, when we send that out, what happens? Well, what we said is once we get a response, we want to call render chat. So we go up into here and we're going to process it. And if you look, note that we got the received, that is server talk. So again, that render chat, once we got a response, when we got a response, was run by my browser. It got the message, that is server talk. And so it added it to our div. So the big thing here is that we have, right, we're running all of this code, but note that it's actually not running on one computer. It's running on two different computers. And this can be kind of confusing. And where students typically struggle, many of you might have problems too, and I will probably be pointing lots and lots of people back to this specific Q&A, is in the fact that the functions that we have to handle the response, to receive that JSON data on the browser side, we never call ourselves. We rely on AJAX GET request and AJAX POST request to do that for us. So, we can type other types of messages. So if it has Python, it says this is server talk. If we have something with JavaScript, note it comes back with this is browser talk. And if we look back, we can see that this is going back and forth. If we have anything else, it just says boring. Right? So this is a way that we can now, using AJAX, bounce messages back and forth between our front end and the back end. And just to point out, so I was adding these strings here. If I wanted, I could redo this. Get this message. And actually, I'm going to remove this quiet just so you can see now. Hopefully now you understand how this works, just to show you the full process. So you can see when we get this chat, it responds with something. So if I make a request, type in Hertz is the one typing, and I know that this is what you all think anyway, so might as well. Right? It's going to come back with a response. Why is it? It's going to come back with a response that I mistyped message earlier. Now, if we do this, and I hit send, again, doesn't have Python or JavaScript in there. So it's going to come back and say boring. And you can see over here, we had this post to debug. See, it says post/send. It got in something and we had it received. Hertz is not good at typing. After it undid the JSON, it responded back. And here I used JSON dumps to convert it to the string to a JSON blob, to convert the data to a JSON blob. It sent back boring. So this gives us an idea. One thing just to point out, because this is, again, a commonly made mistake, so I just want to show you a way that you can check. You can always check your messages being sent if you don't have that quiet is equal to true, right? We can see this was a post request, this was a get request. It helps us debug everything. If I change this post to a route, excuse me. So now I'm saying that /send is looking not for a post request, but for a get request. Then, at the very beginning, it's okay. But if I type in a message, note that it sent it to the server perfectly well. Hi from JavaScript. Note that the JavaScript server was able to receive it. We can see this message for a post to/send here, right here it says post to/send. It got in some data, but nothing happened. And the reason nothing happened is because even though I have a function here labeled /send, in order to handle those post requests, it needs to be at bottle.post. So when I switch that back, now it's able to work. Comes back with that's browser talk because it had the string JavaScript in it. So hopefully that gives you a good introduction to how AJAX works, what AJAX is, how we can use it for admittedly not very interesting applications right now. I promise you there will be more interesting ones to come over the rest of the week. Any other questions? Any other things anybody wants me to go over? Okay. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions, so I will thank you all. Hopefully this serves as a good introduction to AJAX. Like I said, on Wednesday, we're going to be talking a lot more about how to structure these apps and how to write them to do something interesting. And until then, thank you all very much. If you have questions, I will have office hours on WebEx in about 20 minutes. The TAs have office hours throughout the day. You can see the link, find the link both to when they have hours and to the Zoom that they use in Piazza. And of course, there's always Piazza. So thank you. Have a good day.